I stood in front of that white flower for a very long time. That night, when I got home, I set it on the kitchen table next to our yellowed wedding photo. I didn't put it in a vase and I didn't throw it away either. It just lay there, its petals slowly wilting, like a question I didn't have the strength to touch yet. The next 2 days passed in a strange kind of silence. The house was crammed full of funeral flowers, sympathy cards, and leftover food people had dropped off and forgotten. My son and daughter took turns stopping by, but really, they were busy with work, kids, and their own lives. They hugged me, asked, "You doing okay, Mom?" and then rushed out to pick up children, answer phone calls, check emails. I kept saying I was fine. I always said I was fine. I always had to. On the morning of the second day after the memorial, I was standing at the sink, holding a plate still smeared with cake, when the landline rang. It was Pastor Thomas on the other end, his voice steady and kind, just like always. "Margaret, could you come by the church this afternoon?" he asked. "There's something Harold asked me to do with you. I think it's better if we talk in person." My chest tightened. What could Harold possibly have asked him to do that he hadn't told me himself? Part of me wanted to say no, to avoid any more surprises. But another part knew I couldn't keep running from whatever was left. I told him 3 o'clock. That afternoon was chilly. The wind rushed through the bare trees along the side of the church with a fragile, papery sound. I pushed open the heavy wooden door I'd walked through every Sunday for 40 years. The sanctuary was dim and quiet now. No organ, no voices, just soft-colored light from the stained glass. Pastor Thomas was sitting in the second pew, holding a white envelope in his hand. He stood as I walked in, stepping toward me with a look that was both sad and gentle. "Thank you for coming, Margaret. Please, have a seat." We sat with a polite little space between us. He laid the envelope on his knee and rolled it lightly between his fingers, like he was weighing how to begin. "Harold gave me this a few months ago," he said slowly. "He asked me if the time came and you were willing to give it to you. And if possible, he wanted me to pass something along to someone else too." My heart was pounding. I stared at the envelope and recognized the slightly slanted handwriting at the sender line right away. Harold Williams. Why didn't he give it to me himself? I heard my voice climb a little higher, thin with wounded pride. "He was afraid you'd get too upset," Pastor said with a faint, sad smile. "Harold told me there are some things a man finds easier to say to another man, especially when they involve a wife's pride." I clenched my hands together in my lap, not sure if I wanted to laugh, cry, or stand up and walk out. In the end, all I did was nod like someone signing for a package. "Go ahead and read it," he said. "I'll give you a little time." He got up and moved to the back of the church, sitting quietly in the last pew and leaving me alone with the voice of a man who wasn't in this world anymore. I tore open the envelope and unfolded 2 sheets of paper. The faint smell of old paper and ballpoint ink rose up. Harold's handwriting was still the same, shaky but neat and tight. "To my wife, Margaret." Just those first few words and my eyes were already burning. I swallowed and forced myself to read on. "If you're reading this, it probably means I'm gone, and you've decided to open whatever Thomas gave you. Thank you for that, first of all. I know you don't like surprises, especially the indirect kind. I also know if I tried to say this to your face, you'd get so mad you'd stop listening halfway through." I snorted a little despite myself. That was Harold all over, always able to predict my reactions in the most irritatingly accurate way. "You remember 10 years ago when the doctor said I needed a bone marrow transplant? You sat in that office without saying a word, face white as a sheet, gripping your purse so tight I thought the strap might snap. You didn't cry. You just asked the doctor, 'Is there any other option?'" He shook his head. I resigned myself then and there to the possibility that I was not going to be around much longer. A few weeks later, the hospital told us they'd found a match, some young anonymous donor. All I knew was a handful of sterile medical details. The transplant worked. I got more time. You got more of a husband. The kids got more of a father. The grandkids got more of a grandpa. I paused, feeling a sharp twist in my chest. I remembered every drip of chemo, every squeak of the nurse's shoes, the chill of the hospital sheets. A few years after that, when I was doing better, someone from the hospital asked if I wanted to send an anonymous thank you letter to the donor. I wrote a long letter telling this stranger about you, the kids, our little yellow house, even that scrawny apple tree in the backyard. I never mentioned any names. I just signed it. A very lucky man who got to live a little longer. I thought that would be the end of it. Then one day, a reply came. The donor didn't sign a name either. She just said she'd been lost for a long time, had done a lot of foolish things, and donating marrow was her way of trying to make up for some of it. She didn't want anything. She didn't expect anything. She just wrote, "If you get to live a little longer, please use the time better than I used mine." My throat closed up. The lines on the page blurred. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and kept going. I started writing back. Still anonymous, still through the program. I never told her my name, never gave an address, never sent a photo. I just told her how I was using that extra time. Watching grandkids grow up, bickering with you over little things, fixing the fence in the backyard, showing up at church, learning to breathe with machines. You'd probably be furious if you knew how often I wrote about you. I froze for a moment, a strange, messy mix of jealousy, shame, and feeling left out of a story I had assumed I was always at the center of. I know exactly what you'd say if I told you back then. You're ridiculous. Why are you pouring your heart out to some stranger? And you'd have a point, in a way. But I never thought of her as anything other than the person who gave us those extra years. Whenever I saw you nodding off in that plastic chair by my hospital bed, I'd think, I'm living on someone else's time. I'd better make sure it counts. Eventually, I found out she was struggling. I couldn't send money directly, so I asked Thomas to help me get some small amounts to her through the church and a few anonymous funds. I realize if you'd found out, you would have asked, where is this money coming from? Why didn't you tell me? So I put Thomas in a tough spot and asked him to keep quiet. It was the only way I could live with myself. I glanced up at the back of the sanctuary. Pastor Thomas was still sitting in the last pew, looking out through the stained glass. I swallowed and read on. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I'm guessing there was some sort of memorial at the church, and I asked Thomas, if possible, to invite her. Not to make her the center of the day, but so that if you wanted, you could see the person who gave us those 10 extra years. Just once. That's all. I also set aside an envelope for her. It has some money from our savings and the insurance, and a few words I wanted to pass along. You have every right not to like this. You have every right to be mad at me. But I'm begging you, if you can find it in your heart, let her place a flower for me. Then give her what's in that envelope as the last piece of what I owe her. I don't know what her future holds. I just know that without her, you'd have been a widow 10 years ago. The kids would have lost their father 10 years ago, and I wouldn't have been sitting in that old recliner holding your hand, watching snow fall through the window for who knows how many winters. I love you. I always have. Whether you choose to believe that while you're reading this or not. Harold. I don't know when exactly the tears started. All I know is by the time I folded the letter back up, they'd soaked the edges of the paper. My whole body was shaking. I had cried when Harold died, but those tears were for the emptiness, for the loss. These tears were for my own stupidity. The girl at the memorial? I whispered, my voice barely there. The one I told to leave. Pastor Thomas came back up the aisle and sat down beside me, his hand resting lightly on the end of the pew. That's right, he said. Her name is Lily. She got the invitation from the church just the way Harold asked. She hesitated for a long time because she didn't want to upset you. In the end, she came anyway, planning just to lay a flower, sit quietly in the back and slip out. She told me afterward, she understood if you didn't want her there. My chest felt like someone was squeezing it in a fist. Do you have her address? I asked, almost without thinking. He nodded and pulled another small envelope from his pocket. Harold sent this along too. He told me if you wanted to do the rest of what he asked, I should give it to you. There's some basic information in here, an address, and another envelope with her name on it. I took it, my hand still trembling. In my head, I saw Lily again. That cheap hoodie, the smeared mascara, her fingers shaking around that small white flower. I remembered my daughter leaning toward me after the memorial and asking, Mom, don't you think you were a little harsh with her? And the cold answer I'd used to hide how afraid I'd really been. I kicked my husband's lifesaver out of his own memorial service. I said each word heavy. You didn't know, Pastor answered softly. You were in pain. People in pain build walls, but now you do know, and you came here. That, too, says something. I wiped my face again, the envelope clenched in my fist. I have to see her. Finding Lily's place wasn't hard. It was an old complex on the far side of the highway, the kind of place where the balconies were cluttered with broken chairs, plastic plants, and cardboard boxes. I drove there on a gray afternoon, the wind slipping through my coat and making me shiver. I wasn't sure if it was the cold or my nerves. Her apartment was on the second floor at the end of the walkway. The door had once been painted green, but now had a large patch of bare wood showing through. I stood there for a long moment, listening to a TV through the wall, kids running upstairs, a dog barking in the courtyard. I lifted my hand to knock, then dropped it. I did that 2-3 times before finally taking a deep breath and knocking 3 times, softly. Footsteps approached. The door opened a crack, then wider. Lily stood there, not in the old hoodie from the memorial, but in a simple, worn sweater that was at least clean. Her hair was pulled back, her face mapped with little traces of weather and worry. When she saw me, her eyes widened. I started, and all the words I'd rehearsed dried up. I'm Margaret, Harold's wife. She froze for a moment, like she couldn't quite believe it. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. Yes, ma'am. I recognize you, she said. Please, come in. The apartment was tiny but tidy. An old sofa, a small coffee table with a couple of magazines, a low shelf crammed with used paperbacks and a few picture frames. Nothing expensive. The air smelled faintly of weak coffee. I'm sorry I didn't call first, I said, perching on the edge of the sofa, hands twisted around my purse strap. I wasn't sure if I should call or just come. It's okay, Lily said, sitting across from me, fingers laced together. I'm glad you came. I thought after that day, you'd never want to see me again. Her words were another little knife in my conscience. I swallowed, feeling my throat burn. I treated you very badly that day, I said, forcing myself to look her in the eye. I asked you to leave my husband's memorial when you were the one who... My voice gave out. Lily dropped her gaze to her hands, her voice going small. I understand, she said. I wasn't dressed right. I cried too loud. I was a stranger. You just lost your husband. I deserve to be thrown out. No. I said it quickly, louder than I meant to. No one deserves to be thrown out of a memorial for the person they saved, especially when it was his last wish to have you there. Lily's eyes shimmered as she looked up. You read his letter? She asked. I nodded, taking the envelope from my purse and setting it on the table between us. She looked at it like it weighed 100 pounds. She gave a shaky smile. He was the kindest stranger I ever knew. I never thought I deserved to be mentioned at his memorial. I just wanted to place a flower. I knew I wasn't family. In that moment, we seemed strange mirrors of each other. 2 women carrying 2 different kinds of shame. I was ashamed that I'd been so determined to protect my role as the one who cared for him that I'd pushed his lifesaver out the door. She was ashamed of her past, her tattoos, every bad decision that made her believe she didn't deserve to be honored. I didn't know a thing about you, I said. I just saw the dyed hair, the tattoos, the hoodie. I saw everyone staring. I saw myself trying to keep everything proper. I let all of that control me. I never asked the simplest question, who are you? Lily was quiet for a while. Then she took a deep breath like she had to gather herself before opening a door that had been closed a long time. She began. When I was 23, I wasn't a good person. I was using, stealing, sleeping on park benches. I did enough to make my mom cry herself sick. One night I overdosed and collapsed on a sidewalk. In the ER, a doctor told me if I kept going, I wouldn't make it to 30. After I got through rehab, I saw a flyer for a marrow donor registry. It said most people who sign up never get called because the odds of matching are so low. I thought, if I don't help anyone, fine. That's my way of paying something back. If I do help someone, at least one person won't die the way I almost did. A few months later, they called. I was a match for some middle-aged man. I didn't know his name or what he looked like. I was terrified, but I also figured I wasn't sure I even deserved this body anymore. If something went wrong, maybe that was just how it ended. I signed anyway. She paused, looking down at her hands. After the transplant, I was sore and exhausted, but I pulled through. I thought that was it. Then I got this anonymous letter. This man told me about his stubborn wife, a little yellow house, a scrawny apple tree, a creaky rocking chair. My heart jerked. I knew exactly who that stubborn wife was supposed to be. It felt like peeking into a normal life I never had, Lily went on. I wrote back without signing my name, too. We exchanged letters now and then. Not many, just a few each year. He always talked about you. How you yelled when he forgot to turn off the lights. How you dragged out a Bible verse to argue with him about going to his checkups. She laughed sadly through the tears. I always thought, she said, if you ever found out I existed, you'd hate me. So when Pastor said Harold wanted me at the memorial, I told him no at first. I didn't want to hurt you more. But then I remembered his last letter. He wrote, if you want to come, you can. If my wife gets angry, tell her it's my fault for not telling her sooner. I closed my eyes, feeling like Harold had just reached out from somewhere, clapped me on the shoulder and said, see, I told you this would be hard. I stood outside that church for 10 minutes, Lily continued. I watched through the glass. I saw you standing with your family, looking strong. I thought I had no business going in. Then I remembered him saying, my wife can be prickly, but she has a good heart. If you give her a little time, she'll understand. So I sat in the back pew. I didn't dare go up front. I just wanted to hear one hymn, lay a flower, and leave. When you asked me to go, I knew you were hurting. I didn't blame you. I didn't even try to stop the tears anymore. We sat there, two women on either end of a 10-year-long bridge Harold had quietly built out of letters. I have the envelope he left for you, I said, my voice still shaking. There's some money in it, and a few words he wanted to pass along. I know. You probably want to refuse it. Believe me, I spent plenty of time thinking I wouldn't accept any of this, but if you turn it down, it's like telling him those years of feeling guilty about living on borrowed time meant nothing. I think that would break his heart. Lily stared at the envelope for a long time. Finally, very slowly, she reached out and picked it up like it might disappear. I don't feel like I deserve this, she whispered. But if that's really what he wanted, I'll use it to live better, so I don't disappoint him. We fell quiet. A gentle kind of silence. My eyes wandered around the room and landed on a small frame on the shelf. Lily was standing in what looked like a church parking lot, holding a bag of food next to a group of other homeless folks. Behind them hung a banner that read, Community Outreach, Volunteer Day. What are you doing now? I asked. I work part-time at the coffee shop across the street, she said. On weekends, I volunteer at the food pantry. The hospital said I don't have the health to be a full nurse, but I still want to be some kind of help. Partly because of him, and partly because if I stop, I'm afraid I'll get lost again. I nodded, and a thought came to me that surprised even me. I began slowly. If you don't mind, would you maybe come over for Sunday dinner sometimes? That little yellow house feels so empty now. The table for 3 is down to just me. I have a feeling Harold would like knowing his extra time is still connecting us, even with him gone. Lily stared at me, eyes wide. Then she smiled, a shy, bright smile that made her look suddenly very young. If you don't mind having someone with a pretty messy past at your table, she said, I'd really love that. Those Sunday dinners started out stiff and awkward. I cooked like I always had. Roast, mashed potatoes, simple salad. Lily would sit on the edge of the chair, folding her napkin just so, eating tiny bites and saying, thank you, ma'am, every other sentence. A few weeks in, she started showing up with things. First store-bought cookies, then a pie she'd tried to make, then a little bunch of grocery store flowers. The first time my daughter met her, she didn't bother hiding the frost in her voice. She pulled me into the kitchen and hissed, what are you doing, Mom? You brought a stranger with no steady job and full sleeves of tattoos into Dad's house and sat her at his table. He's barely in the ground. Your father knew her before you saw her at the memorial, I answered, steadier than I felt. Without her, you'd have lost your dad 10 years ago. Think about what those 10 years are worth in Sunday dinners. My daughter fell quiet, lips pressed into a line. She didn't answer. The next time she came over, she brought a fruit tray and set it down in front of Lily, nodding a short hello. Her eyes were still wary, but at least we weren't back at outright hostility. Life isn't a movie. It wasn't neat, but it wasn't as sharp-edged as it had been. I brought my story to the church, too. One Sunday after the service, when folks were still milling about in the fellowship hall with coffee and donuts, I asked Pastor if I could say a few words. He nodded and stepped aside. I owe someone an apology, I began, standing near the folding tables and styrofoam cups. Someone I kicked out of my husband's memorial, even though she's the reason I got 10 extra years as his wife and 10 extra years as a grandmother. The room went quiet. People exchanged looks. Lily stood in the corner, her face turning red. I looked at her dyed hair, her tattoos, that old hoodie, I said. I looked at the way folks were staring. I worried about decorum and respectability. I did not look at how red her eyes were from crying. I didn't ask, "Who are you?" I told them about Harold's letter, the donor program, the anonymous letters that went back and forth over a decade. I told them about the white flower on the church steps. In some eyes, I saw surprise, in others, discomfort, and in a few, deep sympathy. I'm not up here to force anyone to love Lily, I finished. I'm here to say I was wrong. I was wrong with my husband. I was wrong with his lifesaver. I was wrong with the faith I thought I held so tightly. If any of you ever find yourself thinking the way I did that day, please just take a minute and ask, "Who are you?" before you shut the door. Not everyone came around. Some still looked at her sideways. But others, older women, came to take her hand and say, "Thank you for giving Harold more time." A few men clapped her shoulder and asked if she'd help with the church garden. And that was enough to keep her from crouching in the back pew like a shadow. With the money Harold set aside, plus some of the insurance, Pastor Thomas, a few others, and I started a small fund with a long name Harold would have gotten a kick out of, the Extra Time Fund. The idea was simple. Help young people coming out of addiction, illness, or major donations, like Marrow, who had no family to lean on. Lily was the first person I thought of as a face and a voice for it. Me? She squeaked when I asked. What do I know about anything? I'm a walking cautionary tale. Exactly, I said. You know every pothole on that road. Someone standing in a dark alley is going to trust a person who's crashed there before more than any sermon. The first time she spoke to a group of young people at the community center, her notes shook so hard I thought the paper would tear. But a few minutes in, when she described lying on a stretcher, hearing a doctor say, "We're running out of options," the room fell utterly silent. I sat in the back, my hands clenched around a tissue, feeling each of her words land. The Extra Time Fund grew slowly but surely. We helped one young man find temporary housing. We paid for another's GED classes. We covered training fees for a girl hoping to be a medical assistant. Not everyone became a shining success. Some slipped back. But every person who stayed out of jail or off that same corner was a win. My children didn't understand at first why I'd share Harold's money with strangers. They said the kind of practical things reasonable adults say. That money was for you, Mom, for us, for the grandkids. Have you thought about your own future? My future, I told them, was stretched out 10 years by a girl I threw out of your father's memorial. I'm not telling you what to do with your share. But this part? I need it to be a way of paying some of that debt back. If you want to think I'm being selfish, that's your choice. They fought me for a while. Then the arguments quieted as they started seeing real results. Letters from the kid fresh out of rehab, a photo of a young woman holding a trade school certificate, awkward, grateful handshakes from people who weren't used to anyone putting faith in them. One fall afternoon, I sat in the very back pew of the church, Lily's old spot, and looked at the plaque we'd just mounted in the hallway. Dedicated in honor of Harold Williams and the stranger who gave him 10 more years. We kept stranger nameless, just the way both Harold and Lily wanted it. Nothing fancy. Just a man's name and a stranger's gift. But I knew who that stranger was. God knew. And enough people knew that behind that word stranger stood a girl who'd wandered off the map, then turned around, who I had once shoved out the door, and who still chose to sit across a table from me and accept my husband's last gift with trembling gratitude. Lily came in and slid into the pew beside me, laying a small white flower on the seat. A perfect twin to the one she'd left on the church steps that night. "Still mad at me?" she teased softly. "I'm still mad at myself," I sighed. "I may be mad at myself for the rest of my life." She laughed, leaning back against the pew. "I think," she said, "if he could see us now, he'd be writing another letter. This time not to the donor or the wife, maybe just to God, saying, 'Thanks for not letting my extra time go to waste.'" I looked up at the stained glass, at the reds and blues and golds splashed across the wooden floor. I thought about Harold, his letters, 10 winters that were all bonuses, the white flower that got kicked out and then picked back up again and put where it belonged. That night, at home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a brand new notebook. For the first time in my life, I logged onto one of those forums my granddaughter had shown me, a place where strangers told their stories and asked a question that sounds simple but never is. Am I the bad one here? I put my fingers on the keys and typed slowly, like I was writing one more letter. To Harold, to Lily, to myself, to anyone who'd ever slammed a door too fast. I'm a 63-year-old widow. At my husband's memorial, I asked a young woman with tattoos and a cheap white flower to leave because I thought she didn't belong there. 2 days later, I learned she was the anonymous bone marrow donor who had given my husband 10 more years with me and our kids. Am I the asshole? I paused for a few seconds, then added one more line at the end. A line I'd never dared say out loud, but now felt ready to admit. I already know I was. I just hope what I've done since then makes those 10 extra years and her gift mean something. I hit post, closed the notebook, and looked up at Harold's picture on the wall. In that photo, his eyes had that familiar half-mocking, half-proud look like he was saying, "See, told you so. You've got a good heart. You just needed a little more time." Extra time. Now I understood it wasn't just the 10 years Harold got from Lily's marrow. It was every day, every week, every Sunday dinner we, those of us left behind, had used to learn how to be a little kinder, a little slower, a little more loving, even when our worst mistakes were the ones we made toward the very person who'd saved us, and we didn't recognize it until it almost felt too late.